Today's video contains spoilers not only for Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, but also the as-of-yet unreleased novelization. So if you want to read the book, or perhaps listen for free with audibletrial.com/Eckhart'sLadder, consider maybe waiting to watch this video. Everyone else, consider yourself fully warned, and let's get on with the content. So, although Episode 9's novelization doesn't actually come out until next month, early versions have been sold by Del Rey at the Chicago Comics and Entertainment Expo. These versions were just sold to whoever's there, and there's no NDA, so naturally portions of the novelization have made their way to the internet. And I was actually really interested in this book, and I still am, because Episode 9 had some good ideas, but so much is just left to the imagination. How does Palpatine come back? Where does the gigantic fleet at the end of Episode 9 come from? What more is there about our main characters and the Sith Eternal, etc, etc. And besides for Reylo stuff, which obviously hit the internet first because of how Reylos are, one of the main quote-unquote leaks was regarding the return of Emperor Palpatine, and I really do not like how this ends up. I'll just read you guys the exact quote from the book, and again, obviously spoilers. All the vials were empty of liquid save one, which was nearly depleted. Kylo peered closer. He'd seen this apparatus before too, when he'd studied the Clone Wars as a boy. The liquid flowing into the living nightmare before him was fighting a losing battle to sustain the Emperor's putrid flesh. "What could you give me?" Kylo asked. Emperor Palpatine lived, after a fashion, and Kylo could feel in his very bones that this clone body sheltered the Emperor's actual spirit. It was an imperfect vessel though, unable to contain his immense power. It couldn't last much longer. So they decided basically to go with the Dark Empire approach, which is Palpatine's soul, or his spirit, is inhabiting a clone body, presumably moving there after the death of his original physical form. And, well, I hate this. Dark Empire 2 and Empire's End really exposed the issue with using a cloned Emperor. Dark Empire 1 is basically written as a self-contained story with the Emperor being killed, or his returning body being killed, but we see in Dark Empire 2 and Empire's End, which I'll call Dark Empire 3, that the problem with this is once you kill one clone body, there's literally nothing, even sometimes an absence of bodies, which would prevent Palpatine from returning to life. If he inhabited one clone body, well, he can just go into another one. And we see in Dark Empire 2 that if Palpatine is smart enough to make one clone, he's probably got many more waiting in the wings. And beyond that, killing a clone body just isn't very satisfying. Sure, he's sort of returned, but to me it's the same issue that lessens Avengers Endgame. Killing something other than the original host just feels like a lesser version of destroying a great evil, and that's even without the continuance problems that I've mentioned earlier. And this even goes so far as to copy the exact issue that Palpatine's clone in Dark Empire has, i.e. that physical bodies have a lot of trouble maintaining this great power. And that's weird for a few reasons. Dark Empire, which was written before most of the Star Wars Expanded Universe and before the prequels, deals with this by saying that Palpatine has actually died before his death at Endor, and that basically he often had to transfer bodies because of the destructive power of the dark side. But why wouldn't this new version of Palpatine be able to contain his power? I mean, it's a physical copy of his body. Most force powers seem to be related to the spirit, so I just don't like that the force and that his spirit can be transferred to a new body, but that body is not able to sustain his power. It gets into issues with midi-chlorians, and it's just not how I imagine the force working. Canon has also repeatedly emphasized that the dark side leads to a sort of separation from the spirit, especially after death. Dark side users can't become force ghosts in the new canon. That's very explicit. That seemed to be something that George Lucas cared about. So to me, this doesn't really jive with the general way that darksiders are treated in new canon. It also seems 1000% clear to me that this is not what the movie intended. If Palpatine was meant to be a clone, I really think that he would have looked like one. We see Snoke being cloned, and all the bodies there look exactly the same as the one that we saw in episodes 7 and 8. Palpatine, however, is clearly meant to be the dead version of what we saw in episode 6, at least in my opinion. I mean, even from an Occam's razor perspective, the simplest answer for why the body is destroyed is because his physical flesh was somehow saved, he was reincarnated, or he managed to hold on to life as he should have died. The machines are clearly some sort of life support technology, they're barely keeping him alive, and to me it's just obvious that it's supposed to be because of the traumatic injury that he experienced. Some people on Reddit also pointed out that when Palpatine is returned to full power after he takes the life essence of Rey and Kylo, that he still has his injuries from the prequels. Now, those are caused by his fight with Mace Windu, they're not genetic, so it makes no sense for the clone to have these injuries as well. There's also the issue of Palpatine's fingers. In my opinion, his fingers are clearly charred because the last thing he was doing as he was thrown down a big-ass pit was shooting off Force lightning, which destroyed his fingers eventually. I'm also not really sure how stealing power from Rey and Ben helps reinvigorate what is essentially a clone body. I think it will just fail again in the future. And to me, it's just a really dumb decision. Cloning in Star Wars, in my opinion, is already lame and overused, and this essentially does the same thing that we have in Episode 6. Palpatine is killed in another form. There's no finality to this. This isn't Palpatine's ultimate form being destroyed. His spirit is still alive. As I've been saying, he could move to a new clone body, or perhaps even take over another being. There's no character like Impatijahos Brand who sacrifices himself to keep Palpatine locked in hell, basically. And yeah, it's just a dumb and lazy conclusion. And that, mixed with other things I've seen of the novelization so far, doesn't leave me to have a whole lot of hope that this will significantly improve the experience of Episode 9, which, to be fair, a novelization should not be expected to do anyway, though has on occasion with, say, for example, the Episode 3 version. But let's finish off this video with a discussion of clones generally, and one of the most maligned aspects of the old Star Wars expanded universe was cloning of Force users. Palpatine returning in a clone body in Dark Empire was controversial at best, and of course he's killed and returns again, and a lot of people found that pretty silly. Corey and I, during our discussion of Dark Empire 2 and Empire's End for our podcast, Tapcaf Transmissions, which I'll link below, noted the same thing. When you bring clones into the mix, there's no real understanding of how the rules work, what can finally kill a spirit, and more. So of all aspects, I don't understand why they'd be bringing this back from Star Wars Legends. But the issue with cloning to me is beyond just there were some questionable stories in the past, but just the fact that cloning Force users is a bit of a dangerous precedent. With the Thrawn trilogy, we got the characters of Jaruus Sabayoth and Luke, and I think if Force users are cloned, it really takes away from the sort of specialness of real Force users, and that's one of my only complaints about the Thrawn trilogy. It's the same with Starkiller in the Force Unleashed series. To me, it's a little too video gamey. This one is a little less bad because at least the spirit of the original being is needed to inhabit the clone. It's not like in Legends, where you could have essentially made an army of crazy Lukes just by getting a hold of his DNA. Or is it? Because it could be exactly like that, given what we see of Snoke at the beginning of Episode 9. So while I don't think The Rise of Skywalker takes away from the sacrifice of Vader, and I've covered that in prior videos, it does sort of continue the effect of having the sequel trilogy just sort of be an unnecessary addendum to the story told in the original 6 films. This isn't a final killing of Palpatine, with his spirit and his body having been weakened by Anakin. This is simply killing him in a new and perhaps weaker but still pretty powerful form. I just don't get it. I think clones are really lame. After this novelization, we could have a sequel trilogy in another 30 years, where Palpatine again has found another stash of hidden clones, and this just is not a satisfying ending, and I think it's a really, really poor choice that I would not have made. This would have been literally my least preferred option for Palpatine coming back, and I just really have to wonder what Lucasfilm was thinking. I hate making negative videos. I don't like ripping on Episode 9, even though I had a lot of problems with it. So this brings me no joy, but it's also just so strange to see the most hated aspects of the expanded universe be brought back in, and to have things that probably should have been explained in the movie instead brought up in a book, and done so, in my opinion, quite poorly. That, however, is all I have to say on that topic. Am I being a little too harsh? Am I being not harsh enough? What do you think of Palpatine being a clone? And if you had written the novelization, how would you have described Sheev coming back to life? I'm not trying to be overly critical of the author, Ray Carson, either, because they were given a very difficult task of finding some way to bring Palpatine back, given that it's not explained in the movie whatsoever. So I'm not trying to throw any shade. That's all I have for now, guys. I know I haven't done any Ask X in a while, but I'll get some done, quote unquote, soon. Until then, have a great one, guys. As always, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. May the Force be with you.